Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. I'm rolling solo for this episode. A quick couple quick notes. Number one, next week I will be out headlining a weekend at the Comedy Mothership. Those shows are all sold out, but for those of you who are coming, Tim Butterly just added to the show, so he'll be featuring all weekend. So for those of you guys who are coming, looking forward to that. It's going to be some great shows. And then I got a bunch of stuff coming up for the rest of the year. I know off the top of my head, I know we'll be in Tacoma, Spokane, Vegas, Detroit, Dallas, Fort Worth, the Poughkeepsie. I got a bunch of other dates up there. comicdavesmith.com. So go, and Robbie Bernstein will be with me on all of those shows. Okay, so for today's episode, I thought I would respond to a video. I'm a little bit late on this, but this was put out last week, the week that I was on vacation. It's a video by Coleman Hughes defending Israel. The video is titled, excuse me one second, so my thoughts on what's happening in Gaza. Coleman is he's a podcast host, but he was also he's an author. He was a Columbia student, I believe, and kind of made a name for himself by being in opposition to like woke insanity on college campuses, probably an area that we would have largely agree about. And I think he made for kind of an interesting spokesman for that anti-woke cause. He was like a bright black student at Columbia, so it was a little bit more like kind of powerful of him being like, yeah, we really don't need all this bullshit. Anyway, I did a response video to him once. I think it was over a year ago, when he was on Rogan, and I, in my estimation, getting it all wrong about the war in Israel and Gaza. But I particularly, the reason why I wanted to respond to this was just simply, it was interesting to me that in this moment now where just about everyone seems to be trying to get off of this sinking ship, which is defending the indefensible, defending what Israel's doing to Gaza. And it just seems to me like a lot of people are jumping off of that. And even the people, like we've talked about a bit on the show here, but whether it was the tone, even in like the Charlie Kirk, Megyn Kelly interview, we have these two champions of Israel, even being like, Jesus Christ, you guys can't smear everyone who's criticizing you. And we can say if the war is going too far and all this. And you've got obviously a lot of high profile people like Piers Morgan who have like completely flipped started, listen, it gets tough. I'm sure we'll get into this in the show. But anyway, I found that kind of interesting that this guy's digging his heels in while so many people are fleeing the ship. And then also I got flooded with people on social media who were asking me to respond to this. And so I figured, really, I am just an instrument of the people. So if you're asking me to do this, why not? Now I saw a few clips of this, and they were like, at least one of them was like a pretty long clip. So I think I have seen most of this, or at least part of this, but I've not watched the whole video all the way through. So I figure we'll jump into this, and I will give my thoughts. Let's start it up.
Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Coleman. Today, I'd like to share a few thoughts about what's happening in Gaza. This is a difficult topic, and there's no way to say anything meaningful about it without offending people, but I think it's important to discuss nonetheless. As I've said on this show and on a few of my Joe Rogan appearances over the past few years, I believe that in the war between Israel and Hamas, the Israelis are the good guys and Hamas are the bad guys. That may seem like a cartoonish way to describe the situation, or it might seem like an obscene opinion given the images of emaciated children that you've probably seen over the past few weeks, but it's still the truth. And it's a truth that's incredibly easy to lose sight of amid the day-to-day coverage of this war.
All right, let's pause it right there already.
Tragedy.
I do think that, as I've said many times before, I think describing wars as good guys and bad guys is like, I'm not saying 100% of the time, probably 99.9% of the time, is a ridiculous starting point. Like, I'm not saying there can't ever be a situation where it is pretty cut and dry of like who the good guys and who the bad guys, at least in this conflict, are. But it's almost never that simple. It's think about it. This is the way a 7-year-old boy talks when he's playing with action figures. Who are the good guys and the bad guys? And even in say the example of World War II, and I am taking absolutely no controversial opinions on this just for the sake of this argument. Okay, so forget any of the stuff that Daryl Cooper or Pat Buchanan or anyone like that is making their arguments about World War II. I'm saying take the official, completely state backed, what they teach you in government schools about World War II. Our partner was Joseph Stalin. Does he just magically become the good guy because he was fighting Adolf Hitler? Like, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like maybe we could have a slightly more sophisticated way to construct how we view these things. But I don't think, to Coleman's specific point in this example, from the perspective of like the Ukrainians who were starved by Joseph Stalin or their family members, he's not the good guy to them. And so also I don't think calling Israel the good guy in this situation is just, I don't think the issue with it is like, that's crazy because of these images that we've seen. It's crazy because of what Israel's been doing. It's hard for, when a group of people are inflicting such a level of human suffering on innocent people, it seems overly simplified and insulting to just refer to them as the good guys. And of course, the calculation that most people who are critical of Israel are making isn't just, okay, there's Israel and Hamas, and now you have to divide them into bad guy, good guy. I'm certainly not working on that framework with my criticism of Israel. It's more that you recognize that there are also innocent Palestinians who are just being, destroyed by Israel. So anyway, I just think this is very shallow analysis to start with. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is The Wellness Company. If you've ever felt like your mind is racing, your mood is dipping, or stress is stealing your clarity, you're not alone, and your only options are not prescriptions with side effects. Introducing Mind Lift from The Wellness Company, a doctor-formulated nutraceutical designed to restore calm, clarity, and emotional balance. This unique blend features low-dose lithium orotate to gently uplift your mood and support healthy cognition, powerful adaptogens.
In the war right now is that both sides have committed war crimes, and in both cases, those war crimes are falling on Palestinian civilians. The truth, of course, is that every war features war crimes, but usually each army commits those crimes against the enemy's population. In this case, the Palestinians of Gaza have received a double dose of the excesses of each side. But here's the crucial point. That doesn't make both sides morally equal. Let me begin by making something clear. When I say that the Israelis are the good guys in this war, I'm not saying that everything the IDF does is justifiable. Far from it. And I'm not saying that Israeli soldiers haven't committed war crimes. Certainly they have. What I mean is that Israel's goals as a country are far more benign and ethical than Hamas's goals. Israel's goal is to live in peace with its neighbors. Now, you can focus on the far-right faction within Israel that wants more than that, but it's just that. It's one faction within a democracy.
Let's pause it right
no
there.
More
I'm sorry, let him finish his sentence. No more representative than...
representative of the will of Israelis than AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene represents the will of Americans.
Okay. All right. So let's pause it right there. Okay. So this is, look, I mean, the whole like, well, listen, war crimes are always committed. And, it's like, all right. Yeah. This seems like a bit of mental gymnastics to get yourself to support the side that's committing war crimes that you can't even deny are being committed. As far as the whole argument about Hamas commits war crimes to their own people, so like the Palestinians are the only ones to get a double dose of these war crimes. Well, I don't know. I don't exactly know. I'd have to I'd be interested almost to prod with questions here of Coleman of what exactly he is saying, because obviously the Hamas committed war crimes on October 7th, and does Hamas commit war crimes against the Palestinians? Like, okay, fine. But if you're going to say that a government, again, Hamas is not a government, but let's just say historically, like any regime, including the United States of America, is the idea that they would, while they're at war externally, also crack down and have authoritarian policies against their own people is not unique. There's nothing unique about that. And that is the norm. That is almost, I'm struggled to find an example where that wasn't the case. I mean, like, what do you think the commies were doing to their own people while they were fighting wars? Or what do you, I mean, the Americans, rounded up Japanese, cracked down on civil liberties, instituted the draft, punished draft dodgers. I mean, there was all types of whether you wouldn't call them war crimes, but I'm just saying, like, the idea that the people of a country, when there's a war, get it from their own regime as well as the regime attacking them is not particularly unique. And of course, the argument that, oh, the Palestinians are getting it so bad from Hamas doesn't therefore absolve the Israelis of giving it bad to the Palestinians. If anything, that just makes you feel that much worse for them. So I don't agree with that at all. But then, of course, he pivots to really what is the kind of only defense that it seems like the people who are still supporting what Israel's doing are left with, which is just essentially the assertion that the Israeli motives are pure. Like, Israel's the good guys because they don't want this. They don't want to be, they want to live in peace with their neighbors, whereas Hamas is the bad guys because all they want to do is kill people. And he could say, almost like preemptively, he goes, oh, yeah, sure, there are some right-wing factions, there are, but that's like Marjorie Taylor Greene is a congressman, AOC is a congresswoman, but that doesn't really speak toward government policy. The problem is that the right-wingers that you're talking about in Israel, like the right-wingers who don't want to live in peace with their neighbors are like Benjamin Netanyahu, Smotrich, Katz, like the guys who are in the upper echelons of power. Those are the guys. This is the Likud party founded by Menachem Begin. These are the guys. Yes, they are those right-wingers who don't want. So this isn't like saying, this isn't like talking about AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2025. This is more like talking about the neoconservatives in 2004, like the people who occupied like all of the positions of power within our federal government. And so, or a huge number of them, and who are getting their policy enacted. So no, this isn't like some fringe element. We're talking about the leaders and the policy that they're enacting. This is what they try to say when they're like, oh, it's like on Piers Morgan, almost every episode now, he'll bring up something Smotrich said, and people will go, oh, that's just one guy. But he's their finance minister. Like, he is the guy who announced that not one grain of wheat would get into Gaza for those 3 months that they had no food coming in. So you can't just say, oh, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene. No, it's not. It's one of the 3 most powerful people in government talking about the policy that he is enacting right now. And in fact, when he threatened to quit the government a few months back, Netanyahu was made sure to keep him on board. So that's just not true. And so if you're going to say, I don't like, I get into these arguments all the time. Like the one that I had the other day where, and this is kind of how defenders of Western aggression typically operate. But so when I was arguing with this guy, I can't remember his name, but when I was arguing with this guy in Piers Morgan the other day, he said at one point, he said the dumb line about Neville Chamberlain or whatever, and I was making fun of him for that. And then he goes, well, you don't understand, that you can't appease dictators. And I was like, we appease dictators all over the globe all the time. What are you talking about? Like, what is it? You can't appease dictators? The U.S. props up the House of Saud and the Jordanian king, and all around the region. We prop up dictators. We've overthrown democratically elected governments and installed dictators many times in the past. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like a bumper sticker line. No, we don't appease dictator. We believe in democracy. And what it really is doing, if you think about it, is it's ascribing intentions. It's ascribing the purest of intentions, as if what's going on, what's driving U.S. foreign policy is that we oppose dictatorship. We believe in democracy, but that's obviously not the case. And so it doesn't make sense to judge governments based off like the rosiest interpretation of what you believe their motives are, even when everything they do completely contradicts the idea that that's their motives, right? Like it's the idea that you're still supposed to sit there after we're in bed with all of these dictators and just say, oh, we're just against dictatorship. It's the same thing as saying Israel wants to live in peace with their neighbors. Israel has never been at peace with their neighbors. That's just a fact. No matter whose side, if you want to blame it all on the other side, okay, but Israel has never been at peace with their neighbors. They've been at war with the Palestinians since the creation of the state of Israel. There has never been peace. There may have been some periods of ceasefire, but this is a long war that's been going on since at least 1947. And, the people who are in power, Benjamin Netanyahu, like I always talk about the clean break strategy and all of that, but the clean break memo was written to Benjamin Netanyahu. And what was the break from? The break was from Oslo. And don't use any of the later excuses about the Second Intifada or Camp David or any of that stuff. This was in 1996. This was only a couple years after Yitzhak Rabin had signed on to the Oslo Accords. Netanyahu has always represented the faction that was against a two-state solution. So don't tell me you're trying to live in peace with your neighbors when your plan is to dominate them in perpetuity. Benjamin Netanyahu, what was it, 2 weeks before October 7th, went to the UN with a map that had all of Gaza and all of the West Bank as part of Israel. So if what you mean by live in peace with them is annex them, okay, but I don't think that's not exactly what most of us describe as peace. All right, let's keep playing.
By and large, Israelis don't want to conquer Gaza. In fact, they left Gaza voluntarily in 2005, and they don't want to wipe Gaza off the map. If they wanted that, they could have done it any time in the last several decades. With their advantage and firepower, they could do it now in a matter of weeks.
Right, let's pause.
And you should ask yourself,
it's just too ridiculous to say, like, Israel doesn't want Gaza because they left Gaza voluntarily in 2005. And this is the thing that they all try to spin, that like, oh, Israel, they gave Gaza back. The occupation ended in 2005 or something like that. But like anybody who knows anything about the situation knows that that's all it's all nonsense. And they admitted this the whole time. And so here, I'll see if I can find the exact quote, because it really is the best one that you need to know. Okay, so here is Dov Weissglass. He was Ariel Sharon's senior advisor. Okay, so this is Sharon was the prime minister in 2005 when they had the disengagement. Okay, and now here is Sharon's senior advisor in his own words, talking. By the way, this just to be clear here, because sometimes people accuse me of quote mining, which I always find to be a hilarious accusation. They go, oh, you just find quotes here or there that suit your needs. And it's like, okay, but it's a pretty big deal if the senior advisor to the prime minister is admitting what the policy was really about. And that's, it'd be like if you were in a murder trial and you were like, I'd like to enter into evidence exhibit A, a written confession by the defendant. And you were like, objection, Your Honor, that's quote mining. Quote mine. It's just a random quote that happens to make his side look better. Yeah, but it's a pretty relevant one. And so I think you can't run away from your own words here. And especially, let me say, when the assertion that Coleman Hughes is making is centered around intent. It's saying, right, Israel doesn't want to do this. Don't judge them based off what they're doing. They don't want to do this. Their motivation is pure, which again, as we've discussed on the show before, it's ascribing any motivation to human beings is always a tricky business. Even saying your own motivations is difficult. Like, I could sit here and say my motivation for doing this show is like, I want to tell the truth and I want to get the message out to you because I think this is such an important message. But like, how much of my motivation is also to make money for myself or for my own ego or for my own whatever? It's like, I don't know. I could try to assess it. And I myself don't even know exactly. So you're talking about motivations now of an entire government apparatus. I think it's reasonable to say, let's look at what they were saying. Here is Dov Weissglass in his own words. By the way, I should also mention, because sometimes people will say, when you bring up things that Netanyahu says to the Likud party, they'll go, yeah, but he's just trying to get he's not really that hard of a right winger. He's just trying to get the right wingers in line. Okay. Dov Weissglass is talking to Haaretz as he says this. He's speaking to the left-wing newspaper in Israel. So he is not trying to earn street cred with the right wingers or something like that. And this is his exact quote. This is referring to the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza. He says, and I quote, "The significance of the disengagement plan is the freezing of the peace process. And when you freeze that process, you prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and you prevent a discussion on the refugees, the borders, and Jerusalem. Effectively, the whole package called the Palestinian state, with all that it entails, has been removed indefinitely from our agenda, and all of this with a U.S. presidential blessing and the ratification of both houses of Congress. The disengagement is actually formaldehyde. It supplies the amount of formaldehyde that is necessary so there will not be a political process with the Palestinians. The disengagement plan makes it possible for Israel to part conveniently in an interim situation that distances us as far as possible from political pressure. It legitimizes our contention that there is no negotiating with the Palestinians." So in other words, he's telling you that the entire plan was part of the clean break, essentially. That is, that this is a break or a version of the clean break. That this is a break from the peace process. This is in his words, this is a break from peace. This isn't to have peace. When some of these guys will try to argue, as Douglas Murray did, that no, we gave the Palestinians their own state. But here's the senior advisor explicitly telling you that no, he's doing the opposite of that. He's ensuring that they never get one. That was the whole game of disengagement. They pulled the Israeli settlements out of Gaza. They pulled the IDF troops out of Gaza. They built more settlements in the West Bank than they pulled out of Gaza, by the way. It's not like they stopped moving on Palestinian land, but then they put a full blockade around the country, and they totally dominate the airspace, the sea space, how far you can fish off the coast, what goods can come in, what goods can go out, who can come in, who can go out. This is how, in the very beginning of the war, right after October 7th, Israel's response was to turn off the water and the electricity. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that to a country you're not controlling? And this is why all of the international human rights organizations all said, yeah, the occupation never ended in 2005. Yeah, you took a prison and you pulled all the guards out and put them around the wall in a perimeter, but that's not the same thing as freeing the prisoners. So anyway, there's just using 2005 as anything to prove what the Israelis wanted, but in their own words, as they admitted, as the players who were enacting this policy admitted, the game was about what he just said, the status quo, keeping the status quo going. They can park comfortably here with the approval of the Americans. And where is here? Where is that status quo? With complete domination of Gaza and the West Bank. That's the status quo.
Wanted that, they could have done it any time in the last several decades. With their advantage and firepower, they could do it now in a matter of weeks. And you should ask yourself why they don't. Hamas, on the other hand, does want to conquer Israel and wipe it off the map. And they would be happy to do what they did on October 7th to the entire country. That's what I mean when I say that the two sides in this war are not the same. There is a huge moral asymmetry between them, and that matters.
All right, let's pause it here for a second.
The point I'm making here...
it's funny that Coleman says this. Like, if Israel wanted to take Gaza, they could. If it, I mean, they have all this more firepower than they do. It's like, it's kind of funny that this comes. He might have made this video's from last week. He might have made this video like a couple days before Benjamin Netanyahu announced that they're taking Gaza. So, I mean, I don't know. It's like, am I to judge them based off their actions, or am I to judge them based off what Coleman Hughes, pinky promises and tells me their real motivations are? They're, and to his point about like they're not morally the same. It's like, I don't think anyone's claiming they're the same. There are lots of differences. That's not really the point. The point is whether what Israel's doing ought to be supported or not. Or I think that's a much more relevant question. And, as far as like this stuff about intentions and saying, well, Israel doesn't want to kill everybody and take the whole thing over, but Hamas really does want to kill everybody in Israel and destroy the whole country or something like that. It's like, this is, it's like, as always with these things, it's such a framing tactic. It's like, first of all, like, you're getting into the game of ascribing intentions while ignoring their own stated intentions, which we could get more into. But then ascribing the worst of intentions to Hamas and the best of intentions to Israel, and then saying, look, these two are morally not the same. I mean, they want to destroy all of Israel, but Israel doesn't want to destroy all of Gaza. And you're ignoring the fact that Israel has destroyed all of Gaza. Like, literally, Gaza is destroyed. I think 80% of the structures have been destroyed. Like, so what is it? What is that? It's like as if you were having a question about the war in Iraq, and you started saying like, well, if George W. Bush wanted to kill every last man, woman, and child Iraqi, he could. And if Iraqi could, they would. If Iraq could, they would kill every last man, woman, and child in America. Like, all of this is totally irrelevant. Like, the question is like, George W. Bush launched a war. Did he have a right to do that? And the answer is no, he didn't. That's what matters, not whatever intentions you ascribe to Saddam Hussein versus George W. Bush. All right, let's keep playing.
Is right on the surface of how we look at most wars in history. It's possible to agree with the goals of an army, but condemn its methods. In fact, it's not just possible, it's actually most people's default view of most wars, including just wars. Many people take that attitude towards dropping atomic bombs on Japan, for instance. Or when you learn about the Union Army burning down 40% of Atlanta, including civilian homes during the Civil War, most of us respond by thinking, wow, that was terrible, and some of it must have been unnecessary, but the North was still the good guy in that war. Why were they the good guys? Not because they were the underdogs. In fact, they weren't. Not because they suffered more war crimes. In fact, the South almost certainly suffered more war crimes. But because their goals were more benign. The South was fighting to preserve slavery, and the North was fighting to end it. If not at the beginning of the war, then certainly by the end. In other words,
pause it there for
the goals that each side is fighting.
Oh, I didn't know that was in here. Okay. All right. Without trying to get off on a whole thing about the Civil War, but it is interesting that that Coleman had to throw that in there, that their goal was to end slavery, at least by the end of the war, maybe not by the beginning. Well, because, your goals at the beginning of the war really matter, because that's when you launched the war, right? So like that, if you launched a war, the thing is that they need that, because otherwise the whole thing kind of falls apart. Like if you realize that actually, and even Coleman must to some degree, because he even himself there goes, okay, well, maybe not at the beginning of the war. Okay, but that gets into like what the actual reason for the war was, because that's when wars are launched, at their beginning. And at the beginning, it was quite clear from the North. There's quotes of Abraham Lincoln you could find on this stuff, where he was very clear that it's like the war was about keeping the Union together. And he was like, if we got to keep slavery to do that, then fine. And if we got to abolish slavery to do that, then fine. But the whole point of the war for the North from the very beginning was that we cannot let the South secede. all that together we stand, divided we fall. That's what it was about. And certainly it was about slavery to the South the whole time. But I'm just saying, like, I think most people, they want a yada yada over that part of it because that part is just so indefensible. Like, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, let's say the issue of slavery was off the table and some states just wanted to leave America. They're like, we don't want to be a part of America anymore. We want to form our own country. And then you said, okay, well, we're going to invade you and burn your states to the ground. Most people would be like, that's a pretty tough one to justify. But that is why the North did what the North did. Anyway, I say all of this to basically just say that I think Coleman's, he's not really making an argument. He's saying that this is people's default settings. I mean, hey, we dropped nukes in World War II, and hey, look at what the North did to the South in the Civil War. But all that really amounts to me is that, oh, there's been horrible atrocities committed in war, but we all tend to agree that they're justified. It's like, okay, but can you make the argument that they actually are? And again, this saying like, what happens is quite often, I think, the winners of wars write the history books, and even if they don't, it's not that simple. It's just they control kind of the way that history is interpreted, because no historian is really arguing that from the very beginning of the war, slavery was the motivating factor for the North to get into the war. Or if they are, it's certainly not the consensus. And I don't think any serious historian is really arguing that, like, Joseph Stalin and FDR fought the Second World War to end the Holocaust or something like that. But that sure is the way it's spun in a lot of people's like popular imagination, that like the Civil War was fought to end slavery and the Second World War was fought to save the Jews or something like that. It's just not true. But that does make it a lot easier to paint these pictures of like, oh, okay, well, so sure, they may have done some bad things, but their goal was like this noble goal. I don't think that any of this is an appropriate or rational way to gauge a war. And I think that the much more obvious one that I've been pushing for as long as I can is like an angle when you're inflicting the level of human suffering that we're talking about in Gaza. I think the obvious standard, like the obvious question should be, do you absolutely have to do this? Is there absolutely no other option? Is it the case that if you don't do this, an even worse amount of human suffering will be inflicted on your people or another group of people? And none of them even ever try to make that argument. None of them even ever try to say, look, this is terrible that Israel's doing this, but it will be an October 7th every single day if we don't, because they know that's not true. Like they know. And so instead you're basing your justification on like, but isn't Hamas a worse group than the IDF, or what they would do if they could? But who cares? They can't. So that doesn't fucking matter. What matters is they can't. Like, it doesn't matter if like some dude in let's say a convicted serial killer who's in a maximum security prison, and you were like, if he had nuclear weapons and the ability to launch them, he would nuke the United States of America. It's like, okay, maybe, but he's in prison. He doesn't have nuclear weapons. Like, there's just, this is a non-issue. And the issue is, what are you doing to these people? And do you have a right to do that? And if you don't, then like, do you absolutely have to? And that, it just seems obvious to me that should be like, the onus should be on anyone defending what Israel's doing at this point to make that argument. And the onus is on them to have an overwhelmingly compelling argument. Like, you can't just go in like, we're going to slaughter a bunch of people because maybe something worse would happen. You'd have to have like definitive like evidence that this is going to be worse than this if we didn't do that. But no one even attempts to make that argument when defending Israel because it's impossible. All right, let's keep playing.
Fighting for matter a great deal. That's not to say that goals are the only things that matter. How armies conduct themselves matters too. And it's very easy to find examples of IDF soldiers conducting themselves terribly. Each example of this should be reported on and exposed, and those responsible held to account. However, it's also true that this is to be expected in any war. If 1% of all human beings are sociopaths, and just humor me with that assumption for a moment, if 1% of all people are sociopaths, then out of 500,000 or so Israeli soldiers that have served in Gaza, you'd expect 5,000 of them to be maniacs. And that would be true in any war. How much damage could 5,000 heartless soldiers do over the course of a year and a half? How many war crimes could they commit against innocent Palestinians? And how much bad PR could they generate for Israel? Yet that's what we'd expect to see, even if the IDF were doing everything right. But is the IDF doing everything right? Absolutely not. For one thing, the choice to cut off all humanitarian aid to Gaza for over 2 months earlier this year in order to pressure Hamas to release the hostages was, in my view, a mistake and arguably a war crime.
So here, let's
Hamas
pause
has
it right there,
stolen
okay, for a
enough
second,
aid.
because this is like this is just like it's trickery, dude. It's like fuck, and I don't see how people can't see through this, or how anyone doesn't see through this. But again, even when he's describing, so he's going, "Hey, look, man, 1% of people are psychopaths. You got an armed force of 500,000. There's going to be 5,000 psychopaths running around." Now, again, even if that's just the case, then okay, you're supporting a policy of unleashing 5,000 psychopaths on innocent people, and you got to back up why that is absolutely necessary. What the hell, man? Like, we're civilized human beings having this discussion. You're telling me I back a policy of 5,000 psychopaths being unleashed on grandmas and children? Okay, dude, but you better have a hell of an argument for why you absolutely have to do this. And that doesn't ever seem to come up. Anyway, the obviously the real problem here is that the psychopaths are Benjamin Netanyahu himself. And like who's and you know, you see when I was saying it's trickery, I mean, you see even where he said, first off, it was 3 months, not 2 months, but whatever. But he goes, yeah, now listen, I think the decision to use starvation as a tactic, you know, I think the decision to deny all food to women and children was a poor decision. You know, I think it was a mistake and even possibly a war crime. It's like, dude, I mean, when your entire argument is relying on motivation, but then you could look at someone doing something like that and go, now this was a miscalculation. Don't you see what like how you're cheating in this game? It's like, yeah, no matter what they do, you will always this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a lone psychopath soldier who did something like this. This was the war cabinet and Benjamin Netanyahu and Smotrich making a policy decision that no food will be allowed into Gaza for 3 months after like 20 plus months of slaughter. It's like the most horrific. Like, how can anybody try to justify that policy? It's just insane. Like, it's insane that we live in a first world country where there's like school buses picking up kids and high-speed internet and plenty of food at the supermarket, and anyone's even going to attempt to justify that policy without attaching it to some like, I know this seems crazy, but we absolutely have to do it because of this. Like, where is the like necessity for this? It's just anyway. So again, this is all just cheap from yes. Is the Israeli government at the highest level decided to deny food to babies and old people for 3 straight months. All right. Let's keep playing.
To survive in its tunnels for a prolonged period. We know that. And they're completely unaffected by the suffering of their own people. We know that too. You can add to this the failed experiment in aid distribution that's been going on since May. IDF soldiers using live rounds for crowd control, which is to say, shooting above people's heads to disperse crowds. But there are also credible reports of soldiers shooting civilians who are trying to get food and accidentally go into a prohibited zone. Now, some of these are tragic accidents and some are doubtless war crimes.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. Jesus Christ, dude. I mean, it is like I don't know. I swear to God, I'm not trying to be like inflammatory, but it is. Do you get my point? Like, even when I was saying in the Alex Berenson debate the other day, it's so weird that people like they talk about Holocaust denial and then accuse people who aren't denying the Holocaust of denying the Holocaust. But like, just tell me, what exactly am I listening to right now? Like, what is this? It's just twisting yourself into pretzels to make excuses for the most horrifically inhumane activity. So he goes, like, even now, the IDF has been known for firing live rounds as crowd control. The shooting above, there's a long line, including like elderly people and babies, as well as just innocent men and women who are desperately hungry, trying to get their hands on some of the crumbs from one of these, aid deliveries. And the IDF shoots live rounds at them, to move them around a little bit, to keep them out of that zone and in this zone. And oh, by the way, these live rounds, they don't always go over their head. Sometimes they go right into their head. Hundreds of them have been killed in these situations. And you're just like, even under the best case scenario that you're saying, like, no, it was just crowd control, we were shooting above their head. Like, what are we talking about? Fucking cattle here? They're goddamn human beings desperate for food. You're talking about how there's, and of course, as he alludes to there, some IDF soldiers have even said, they said they were given orders. They were given orders to shoot at the crowd of people. And the piece was a little bit vague about what exactly they were ordered to do. But a bunch of IDF soldiers reported this. I believe at least one went on the record. And the Israeli government has confirmed this. So, like, yes, the IDF, right, they're shooting live rounds at people who are, like, suffering through the worst, like, war-torn crisis imaginable. And that's okay, or what? That's like, they'll say this thing where it's like, well, if people are committing war crimes, then they should be prosecuted. Like, okay, but they're not being prosecuted. There's two former, I say at least two former Israeli prime ministers have come out and said Israel's committing war crimes. There's a ICC arrest warrant out for Netanyahu. None of them are being held accountable. You know what I'm saying? So, like, at what point, if you're still defending the thing where no one's held accountable, are you just defending the war crimes? Anyway, let's keep playing.
Worth lingering over the asymmetry of war crimes even here. When an IDF soldier goes berserk, he commits a war crime. But every time a Hamas fighter shoots a bullet without wearing a uniform, it's a war crime. Hamas's entire MO is one big war crime. And unlike most wars, where each side is committing crimes against enemy civilians, in this case, almost all of the excesses, both of the IDF and of Hamas, fall on Palestinian civilians. But whose fault is that? Is it Israel's fault that its own civilians are incredibly well protected by defensive infrastructure like the Iron Dome and bomb shelters? Is it Israel's fault that Hamas has built one of the most extensive networks of underground bomb shelters in the history of warfare, but doesn't allow its own civilians to enter them? Is it Israel's fault that Hamas uses children as lookouts, thereby turning them into combatants under the international laws of war? Because when we hold
right.
Israel alone
responsible, I mean, I don't know what, just asking, asking yourself the easiest questions that no one's asking and then answering them. It's like, even in that, it's like, is it Israel's fault that Hamas uses children as lookouts, thus under international law, turning them into combatants? Like, no, I don't think anyone ever said it was. Hey, how about all the children who aren't used as lookouts? They would not be combatants, right? How many of them have been killed? Oh yeah, thousands. Well, we don't know the exact number, but thousands and thousands of them, tens of thousands probably. Like, it's like, no, how about instead of asking, is it Israel's fault that their civilians are protected by Iron Dome? Has anyone ever said that in the history of the world? No. How about this? Is it Israel's fault when their soldiers are shooting rounds of live ammunition at crowds of hungry people and killing a bunch of them? I'd say yes. Like, no, it's yes. When Israel drops bombs on innocent civilians and slaughters them by the tens or hundreds of thousands, that's their fault. Hamas is responsible for the war crimes they commit, and Israel's responsible for the war crimes they commit. And the Palestinian people are responsible for none of them. Let's keep playing.
For the civilian death toll in Gaza, a death toll that results directly from Hamas's barbaric style of warfare, we are implicitly holding Israel responsible for Hamas's war crimes against the Palestinians. Now, it's incredibly easy to lose sight of this, given the mainstream media bias on the topic. For instance, the New York Times released a story on July 24th entitled, "Gazans Are Dying of Starvation." The article relied on testimony from several doctors working in Gaza, as well as the Gaza Health Ministry. And it used that to build a case that deaths from starvation are on the rise. In the article, there was one photo that stood out. It was a photo of a mother holding an emaciated skeletal infant named Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak. This photo was displayed prominently on the front page of the physical edition of the New York Times and made the rounds on social media. You almost certainly saw it. And importantly, it was the only photo in the article that clearly suggested starvation as opposed to chaotic, hungry refugees. Now, it wasn't long before sleuths on X discovered that there was another photo, which the Times chose to omit, of the boy and his mother next to his 3-year-old brother, who clearly isn't starving. So if there's no food, why is the 3-year-old not also thin? It turns out this young boy didn't look emaciated because of starvation conditions. In fact, he was born with serious disease, perhaps cerebral palsy or hypoxia. It's not yet clear. But 6 days after the article came out, the New York Times had to issue a correction, noting that the boy was born with unrelated health issues that account for his skeletal appearance. Now, if such crucial information could be left out of the original article, what other information was left out? Now, let me be clear here. I'm not saying there isn't hunger or...
Okay, yeah, he's not saying there isn't hunger, of course, because there's been widespread reports of hunger. And the New York Times did make a correction about that baby. By the way, I mean, I guess it's like, so only the sick babies are starving or something like that is the defense here. Actually, the mother of the baby said that the doctors told her that the reason that the baby was so sick was because she was malnourished during the pregnancy. But I guess we can ignore that. I do find it it's so funny because they'll cling to like the one image where like, oh, look, the New York Times had to admit this baby also had another disease that certainly it's not getting the proper treatment for because Israel's destroyed the entire strip. But okay, how many images do you need? How many images do you need? You're right. We just haven't gotten enough images out of Gaza of the kids suffering there. I guess it's not so bad. Yeah, look, like the New York Times fucked up and then they made a correction. I guess that this information should have been added. But again, this is just like totally dodging the bigger point here in the bigger picture. There's been mass reports of starvation and food insecurity all throughout Gaza. And what do you think's going to happen when you deny all food for a prolonged period of time into an active, war zone? Or the place is just being completely destroyed. And people are living in makeshift, shanty tents at refugee camps because goddamn every structure has been brought to the ground. I mean, what are we even arguing here? All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Masa Chips. These chips, everyone's talking about them. If you don't know, today's seed oils make up to 20% of the average American's daily calories, and recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues, inflammation in the body, and more. Masa decided to do something about it. They created a tasty and delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils. These chips don't only avoid all the bad stuff, they taste incredible too. Masa is crunchier, tastier, and sturdier than other chips, doesn't break in your salsa or guacamole. Snacking on masa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With masa, you feel satisfied, light, and energetic with no crash, bloat, or gross sluggish feelings afterward. And as an added bonus, that beef tallow makes the chips even more satiating, so you won't find yourself uncontrollably binging and still feeling hungry afterward. Masa chips are beloved by tens of thousands of customers and have been endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts like Ben Greenfield and Gary Brecka. If you're ready to give masa a try, go to masachips.com/Dave and use the promo code Dave for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/Dave, promo code Dave for 25% off. All right, let's get back into the show. And you know, to the bigger point, let me see. I was trying to just look up what was the leaked New York Times Gaza memo, where the New York Times told their journalists to avoid the word genocide, ethnic cleansing, and occupied territories. I just find it kind of interesting that the people who are defending Israel kind of have to. They almost create this alternate universe where they'll go, well, the mainstream media's coverage is totally pro-Hamas or something like that. As if, yes, there's been no Israeli influence over the corporate media in the United States of America. You remember what was it last year that one point I think Ben Shapiro said that Hamas was running the Joe Biden administration? It's just like, how are you going to argue that like the establishment, like the establishment is all pro-Palestinian, but you're the ones speaking up against the establishment? The establishment is the ones funding Israel. They're the ones arming this goddamn genocide. They're the one. I saw one military guy who was saying he didn't think that the Israelis could keep the war going for 2 months without America. Like they are our intelligence support, our weapons, our money. It's totally necessary to this whole thing. So the idea that, you know, you're arguing here somehow, I don't know, whatever, that you're arguing you're taking on the establishment. The New York Times is trying to make it out like Israel's committing all these war crimes when it's not really that bad or something. It's like, dude, the entire system is perpetuating this thing. And the New York Times has been as guilty as anyone in covering that up. But yes, they have done a couple pieces on just how bad it is in Gaza. And yeah, you're right. They rely on the medical professionals who are over there and the Gaza Health Ministry and the UN, because Israel won't let international journalists in. And so that's what you got to rely on. So as Israel is doing this, they won't let the world see it and report on it. And so now you're criticizing the little bit of reporting that's going out for not being like, for having something omitted in it or whatever. Maybe Israel should let journalists in. We could get more information about what's really going on. I wonder why they don't want that. Let's take a guess. I'm sure we can always just ascribe the best of motivations to them. That's what they always do, right? They don't want the journalists in because they're worried about the journalists. Yeah, I don't think so. All right, let's keep playing.
Or food insecurity or humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Of course there is. What I'm saying is that the pipeline that's feeding you information about the humanitarian disaster in Gaza is fundamentally broken, biased, untrustworthy, and weaponized against Israel. Now think about what had to happen for the New York Times to publish that photo on its front page without the information that this particular child was born with serious disease. Journalists had to talk to the child's mother and doctor, who presumably withheld this crucial detail. And the claims had to survive fact-checking without anyone at the Times pointing out how strange it was to see one child emaciated and his brother right next to him looking fine. And then after the Twitter sleuths got to the story, they had to call this doctor again and ask him, hey, did you by chance leave out the fact that this particular baby looks the way he does because he has a disease unrelated to this war? And then you have to wonder, because the entire story is based on the testimony of similarly placed doctors, how many of the doctors in Gaza, who are generally not neutral about the two sides in this war, how many of those doctors who talk to Western journalists are making similar omissions?
Okay,
and if
so
they are,
hold on. Let's pause it there for a second.
Know?
Why man, the doctors in Gaza tend to not be neutral on this war. Well, gee, Coleman, I wonder why that might be. Like what? Like you say it as if that proves anything, or that means therefore that like we can't trust the doctors. I like the idea that like the doctors in this war zone are they're the bad guys. You know, the people going in and risking their lives to treat these babies. We can't trust them, and you know why we can't trust them? Because they tend to oppose these babies being killed. So maybe because they're the ones who have to deal with it, that have to actually see it up close. Yes, the doctors, for all those doctors in Gaza, the numerous ones who have reported treating babies with sniper bullet shots in their chest, in their head, in their legs, they are against those snipers shooting those babies. Well, doesn't that just solve the whole thing right there? And again, you could muddy the waters all you want here, but it's Israel who's not letting international journalists in. I'm sorry if you feel like there's some problem with the trustworthy nature of the reporting coming out of Gaza, you got one group only to look at to blame for that. Anyway, let's keep going.
As for the Gaza Health Ministry, which is a part of Hamas's political infrastructure, it's very difficult to trust their reports as well. I mean, on one level, they're the only real source of information about what's happening in Gaza, so you can't just discount them blindly. But nor can you trust them blindly. Recall that when there was an explosion at a hospital early on in the war, the same Gaza Health Ministry reported within minutes that exactly 471 people had been killed by an Israeli bomb that hit the hospital. And the New York Times reported this uncritically. Well, it turns out the true death count was less than half that number. The hospital itself wasn't even hit. It was the parking lot next to the hospital. And oh yeah, it wasn't an Israeli bomb. It was actually a Palestinian Jihad rocket. So one has to be skeptical about how the Gaza Health Ministry arrives at its confident conclusions. And one has to understand that their incentive is to exaggerate as much as they can get away with.
All
and
right,
the less
let's pause it
skeptical
for a
that
second
we
there.
are as Western.
Because honestly, like it's kind of pathetic to be. I think this was what 2023. He's going back to there was this report that was yes, they said they hit the hospital and 400 people died, and then they revised it down. They've also revised their numbers down a couple times, and that doesn't really seem to jive with what you're talking about. But I'm sorry, dude, to be sitting here in what is halfway through August in 2025 and to be like, hey, remember in 2023 there was one hospital that they said got hit that didn't actually get hit. By the way, that hospital did get hit later. Like, what are we even, dude? There's reports every single day in the news. There's another report about the 172 Palestinians who just got killed, another 65 Palestinians got killed, every single day there's another, and you're cherry picking the one that was initially reported wrong. All right. I mean, what's really the argument there? Okay, yes, we're not getting perfect information about every single strike. We have a pretty clear general picture when 70 to 80% of the buildings have been leveled in Gaza. Let's keep playing.
Journalists, the more they can exaggerate without penalty. Again, the information pipeline here is just fundamentally broken. Finally, I want to discuss the charge of genocide, because this is one of the most serious charges made against Israel. It's also, in my view, one of the most absurd. Genocide is the physical destruction, not the metaphorical destruction, not the destruction of property, but the physical destruction of a people in whole or in part. Israel's aim in Gaza is not to destroy the Palestinian people as a whole, nor to destroy Gazan Palestinians in particular. How do we know this? Because even if we accept the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers at face value, that is 60,000 people killed in Gaza in about 22 months of war. That is 3% of Gaza's population. You could argue that it's more than 60,000 dead because there are uncounted bodies tragically trapped under the rubble. But on the other hand, you'd have to subtract the combatants from that number as well, and the IDF says that about 20,000 combatants have been killed. To be clear, my default assumption is that both sides in any war are exaggerating their numbers. But for the sake of argument and fairness, let's just take both sides at their word for a moment. So 60,000 dead, 20,000 of whom are combatants. That's about 3% of Gaza's pre-war population killed in 22 months of war. Now, critics of Israel are fond of pointing out just how big the power disparity between Israel and the Palestinians is. And they are completely correct. Israel can do just about anything it wants. If the IDF chose to destroy Gazans as a people, they could kill almost everyone in Gaza in a matter of weeks. So ask yourself, why haven't they? And if your answer is international pressure, meaning they really would like to commit a genocide, except they don't want to become a pariah state like North Korea, well, then you've already conceded that they're not, in fact, committing a genocide. What you're accusing them of in that case is harboring secret wishes that they're not acting on. So we can have that conversation.
Oh, okay.
That's
Hold on,
separate
pause it
from
right
an
here.
accusation.
This is just, this just really spun off the rails here. Hold on. So this is just totally incoherent. So he starts by saying genocide is trying to destroy a people in whole or in part. Then he goes, well, they're only doing a part. They're not doing the whole. Like what? I don't know. What does that mean? Like, again, the problem here is that genocide is such a vague definition, but by the definition Coleman just gave, it meets it. Are they not destroying them in part? You just gave the exact number. I mean, obviously, you're just making this up. And I'm making it up, I shouldn't say. You correctly prefaced that we don't even know if these numbers are real just for the sake of argument. I'm just saying, for the sake of argument numbers here, you gave a percentage. That's it in part. Are they doing it intentionally? Absolutely. So what are you even saying here? The argument is that they could do worse, but they don't. Why is that? If you say it's for international pressure, then you're admitting that they secretly want to do something that they're not doing. Like what? None of this proves anything. And it's not just, like, I guess I could add a few things on this, but no, like I've said before, but like if a guy runs in, to a room with an Uzi and kills, 10 people, and you're like, yeah, but there were 50 people in that room. He could have killed all of them. And then he gets away. At court, he's not going to get any extra points for like, you could have killed more people and didn't. We're still pretty mad about the 10 people you killed. And that's what this trial here is about. It doesn't prove anything. And then, for him to say, oh, well, why doesn't Israel do it? Essentially, you're saying they want to do something that they're not really doing because of international pressure or something like that. Okay. What they seem to be doing, what they have basically done right now and seem to be doing, again, I'm not taking any Arab or Palestinian sources here, okay? This is just what the Israelis are telling me. They are destroying the Gaza Strip. They've basically leveled the entire goddamn place. They're now openly talking about ethnically cleansing the people out and taking it. Benjamin Netanyahu just announced they are taking back Gaza. An occupation, maybe an annexation, depending on what you want to call it. Okay, so that seems like that was their goal. To kill a whole bunch of them, destroy their people in part, and then take their land. That seems to be what they're doing. Now, if you're going to say they would do more, but for international pressure, well, it's a little bit more than just international pressure. I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly how much more Israel could do. People say that a lot, but it's not actually so clear. People like, again, this is a little bit above my pay grade. I really do not know the answer to this. So if there's anyone listening who's like, you really know your science on this, then you might know the answer better than me. But I'm not sure. Could Israel nuke Gaza? I've never even heard of like a nation, I mean, I guess I've heard North Korea threatening to nuke Seoul or something like that. But you're talking Israel and Gaza. I would imagine, depending on which way the winds are blowing, that could go really bad for Israel. Could they be killing people at a faster rate? Perhaps. But again, like, it's not just that, oh, look, they've already turned themselves into a pariah state. It's not just like, oh, there might be concerns that would, turn the world against you more. But it's also that Israel is, as we all know, a fat welfare mom of nations. They are completely reliant on the West. They live off of our welfare. Like I was saying before, they could not continue this war without American support. They couldn't look at what just happened in Iran. They couldn't do that without American support. They can't do any of this shit without us. Even when what was it, when they killed that Iranian last year, and there were like missiles thrown back and forth, not the 12-day war, but before that, when they were throwing missiles back and forth, it was even back then, it was America who had to come in and shoot those missiles down, as well as the Saudis and the Jordanians, and I think the Turks helped a little bit. But in other words, all the other countries who we give money to. So like, no, yes, alienating the people who you depend on obviously is a consideration. This doesn't prove anything. All right, let's play a little bit more, because I want to see if Coleman's actually getting to a point here. But if not, we could wrap.
Of genocide. The Nazis killed 60% of European Jews. The Turks killed over 50% of Armenians. In Rwanda, something like 80% of Tutsis were killed in 100 days. Those were genocides. And in legitimate cases of genocide, in which a smaller percentage of people were killed, it was because the genocidaire didn't have the ability to kill more. Now, we know that Israel could easily kill 50% or 60 or 80% of Gazans in less than 100 days, if they wanted to, but they don't. And that's really all you need to know to be sure that Israel isn't committing genocide. The focus on what an Israeli defense minister said in his angriest moment after October 7th.
If you pause it right now, but isn't like, couldn't, anyway, the argument never came together. It just didn't mean anything. It's like, yeah, like you said in whole apart, just saying other genocides killed a higher percentage. You didn't argue like, what is the threshold? What makes it not so it makes it not genocide because they could do more, but they're not doing more. So like, okay. I mean, I'm just thinking like, is this ever really, like, I don't know. The argument makes no sense and is totally incoherent, but I'm just thinking out loud as I'm hearing this for the first time. But like, is it really the case that we can demonstrate with every genocide that was the absolute maximum number of people that guy could have gotten away with killing? Like, I've never even in my life thought, when you judge Joseph Stalin based off the Holodomor or something like that, are you ever going to yourself, but did he max out? Could he have killed more people? Like, in all cases, probably they could have killed more people. And I'm sure there are some cases where they couldn't kill more people. But I should say in all cases, I'm saying in the major genocides that you're thinking of, you could probably make the argument that they could have killed more people. I don't think that makes them not genocidal. And I just don't think, like, I don't know, but I certainly don't think, like, if you're going to argue that Israel could have killed way more people, like, I'd actually need you to make that argument. Like, take me through that a little bit. How could they have killed so many more people? But it's not so self-evident. Like, Israel seems to be pushing what they can get away with right now. It's not so obvious that they could get away with a lot more. But by Coleman's own definition, he admitted it. He said it's trying to destroy a group in whole or in part, and then gave you the exact part that they've destroyed. And they've done that intentionally. Not really seeing what your argument here is. Anyway, I do, I gotta say, man, I think this is, for people who are still at this point in the game, like finding these ways to twist themselves into pretzels and do the mental gymnastics to somehow try to justify this happening when it so obviously just doesn't need to happen. I gotta say, man, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I trying not to be like too hyperbolic or something here, but like, are you at all worried about God, man? This is like what I think with all these people. None of you guys are afraid of God. You don't think about like the fact that like you're in a position where like you got a little bit of influence, you have a voice, you have followers who are listening to you, and this is the issue you choose to stand on, is to excuse away this shit, try to find a justification for it. I don't know. I would not want to stand on that with that in my my legacy. Anyway, that's the show for today. Thank you guys for listening. Members only tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Catch you then. Peace. Everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. He is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, Mr. Smith. How about yourself?
Very good. Very good. It's a beautiful day outside. It feels like spring is finally here, Rob. I think it's going to be 80 degrees today. So I'm going to have to trade in this hoodie for a t-shirt. after this
I'm gonna
podcast
go
and
oil
go.
up my tits and sunbathe, baby.
There you go. Now there's a
Get the
visual
tan
for you.
going.
All right. Okay. So let's jump into this today. You know, I was full disclosure, I was a little conflicted about whether or not to even do a response to this, but I decided
No Twitter
that,
beef will go unsquashed.
well, you know, look, I feel like I at the risk of, I don't want to beat some of these topics to death. But at the same time, you know, when somebody's specifically making content about you and it's being viewed by hundreds of thousands of people, there's a feeling of like, well, I should respond to this, especially when I think they're making very bad arguments, shockingly bad arguments, I would say. And you know, look, I mean, this debate is just, it's been huge. It's really been unbelievable to me that it just has not stopped. Like, I kind of thought it would be like a few days of being crazy, but it is just, we're a couple weeks later and it is still just, you know, really crazy, the response to it. And anyway, so the video, I'm going to respond to Konstantin Kasin's video. We've tweeted back and forth many times over the years at each other, but recently, this morning, he irked me a little bit with something he said. So I was like, all right, you know what? Maybe it makes sense to do a response to this. He certainly seems to want to jump in to the conversation, so let's do it. As I've said before many times, I claim the right to respond when I am criticized, and so I'll be exercising that right today. I do think,
Their stupidity will be obliged.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, me and Konstantin, I think have, you know, I don't remember every interaction, but I think we've done a pretty good job of remaining civil while going back and forth and disagreeing on things. It seems to me like over the last couple times he's tweeted at me that civility is going away a little bit. I'm, you know, like I always am. My starting point is always like, let's talk about the ideas, let's debate the issues. But if you want to be insulting and vicious, like, okay, I'll do that too if that's what you want. I'll kind of try. I'm going to try my best not to do that in this episode. He did tweet at me something this morning about how he's always said I was very intelligent, but now he's beginning to question that or something like that. And it's just, you know, with all of these things, it's like, look, I get into sparring with people and I'm on Twitter and I do, you know, internet debates and stuff. And so I've been a part of all of this. The truth is that I really do care about the issues that I'm talking about. And I just find them to be much more interested. Like, I don't give a shit what Konstantin thinks of my intelligence. Like, who cares? It's just the most uninteresting and unimportant thing. Anyway, what I do care about is some of the ideas that he's presenting here. So he made he wrote an article, and that this is how he does it. He like writes articles and then he reads them. So we'll go through the video because that's a better, more enjoyable way to do it for podcast listeners. So let's jump into it. This was Konstantin Kasin's take on the debate between me and Douglas Murray. And he did, playing it there. He did say, which was interesting, that this is his most read article ever. And, you know, probably just because it was, you know, you have a debate on Joe Rogan. There's just not that many debates on Joe Rogan's show, and it's the biggest show. And we had, you know, two big names debating about the most contentious issue. So it makes sense to me that this would be a widely read article. All right, let's, sorry, go ahead, Natalie, you can play it.
Prepare for the unprecedented. I'm about to admit I was wrong. For years, I've celebrated the rise of new media and its impact on our ability to seek truth, challenge false narratives peddled by legacy institutions, and transform the way we conduct our public debate. The rationale behind my thought process seemed solid. After all, the medium is the message. The reason I thought our conversations about politics, culture, and entertainment had become so fake was the rapidly shrinking soundbite and a media elite more interested in winning than learning. Journalism, academia, and politics merged into a monoculture whose consensus rested primarily on the vigorous inhalation of gases emanating from their own backsides into which they'd firmly inserted their heads. "I don't know anyone who voted for Trump," was their mantra. Far from being a confession of ignorance and a lack of perspective, this phrase was uttered with pride at dinner parties to signal membership of the elite class. The response from this contingent to the sequential dismantling of their core assumptions about the way the world works was an attempt to use credentialism to make reality go away. "Experts think vaccinating newborns against COVID is essential. Now pipe down, mask up, and follow the science." TM. In decades past, absent the ability to make their voices heard, the proles would have had to grumble away about Big Pharma in obscurity, as people, mostly hippie lefties, had been doing for ages. But thanks to the technological revolution, which reduced the cost of running a major broadcasting channel from millions of dollars to the price of a smartphone, the era of gatekeeping was well and truly over. The discredited mainstream media continued to peddle lie after lie in an attempt to keep its political opponents from governing and being re-elected. But it then faced a powerful counterweight. Elon Musk ended the regime of censorship and enforcement bias in the digital public square of Twitter, declaring, "You are the media now," as major podcasts and YouTube shows secured audiences most mainstream media outlets can now only dream of. By the time of the last year's presidential election in America, the rise of new media had become undeniable, with many rightly calling it the podcast election. Curious, open-minded, inquisitive podcasters, unrestrained by the need to comply with corporate media message discipline and social media censorship, were finally able to speak freely, seek the truth, and debate controversial ideas in good faith in front of grateful audiences of millions.
Okay,
so far, so wonderful.
We could pause it right
After
there.
all,
I could not agree more with the "so far, so wonderful" point. So this is, I mean, I think a pretty good start that me and you, Rob, would probably largely agree with. I mean, I do think to some degree he's underselling exactly how corrupt and evil the old media guard was. But more or less, that's, I think what he's starting with there is exactly right. And it's exactly the type of stuff that we've been saying for a long time on this show. There's just no question that this is what's happened. You know, I mean, the corporate media lost all of their trust. They were lying and weaponizing these lies to maintain power. It got to a point where everyone saw through it, and now people are pursuing alternate voices. I guess the only thing in there that I'd kind of disagree with is that there was never, you know, when he says the era of gatekeeping was finally over, well, that's not exactly ever true. It's never the case that there's no gatekeeping. You know what I'm saying? Like there's always, it's just became a much more decentralized group of gatekeepers, but there's still always going to be some voices who get in and some voices who don't. Every show, no matter what the show is, they get to choose who they have on and who they don't have on. It's just that you don't get to gatekeep in the same way. So like, let's say, for example, you're talking about the idea of vaccines. Well, the pharmaceutical companies, with their somewhat significant influence over the corporate media, can gatekeep voices like Bobby Kennedy from ever getting on there. But if Joe Rogan wants to have Bobby Kennedy on, there's nothing they could do about it. The same can also be said for the military-industrial complex. I mean, if you turn on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, you are hearing from former CIA director, former Pentagon employee, former director of national intelligence, but you're not hearing voices like whether left or right. You're just not hearing the people who are outside of that, or very rarely hearing the people who are outside of that establishment. But now Tucker Carlson gets to decide. It's not up to some suit in a corporation somewhere. It's up to the guy who's built the trust with his audience, like it or not. So anyway, that would just be my only bit of critique there. But a good start from Konstantin Kasin. It seems like we've got a great bit of content here. He gets it. We'll see. Any thoughts on any of this, Rob?
Well, I'm looking forward to the pivot to, hey, but there's this one thing that's just too important for people to be allowed to have freedom.
But not Israel. Everything else is fine.
Yeah.
Just not. Whoa. We got wars to fight here.
And
Okay.
that's different than when you heard that pitch from people that wanted to tell you that about global warming, and that's different than when you heard it about COVID, and it's different when you heard it countless other times. But this one is actually so important that we can't allow for that freedom thing because people are getting it wrong.
There you go. Okay, let's keep playing.
Well, what could go wrong with democratizing information? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. Just as the assumptions of the elite class were proved wrong by the actions of their fellow citizens during the era of Trump, Brexit, and COVID, the assumptions some of us held about the future of the media are now crumbling before our very eyes. With politics becoming the primary form of entertainment in Western society, more of us now get our news and opinions from entertainers rather than serious commentators, and, just as importantly, we often struggle to tell the difference between the two. Now, having transitioned from a career in comedy to my current role as writer, interviewer, and political commentator, I can hardly complain about the meshing of culture, politics, and entertainment. And I am not complaining. I'm merely pointing out that the incentive structures and thought patterns we would typically associate with the entertainment business are not the same as those we would expect to see in journalism and academia. This difference was perfectly illustrated in the recent debate between journalist and author Douglas Murray and comedian and podcaster Dave Smith on the Joe Rogan Experience, the world's biggest podcast. Officially, the full 3-hour discussion was mostly about the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, with Smith being in the so-called anti-war camp and Murray being a supporter of both Israel's campaign to eliminate Hamas and Ukraine's struggle to retain its sovereignty and independence. These conflicts and both men's positions have been debated endlessly. That part of the discussion is less relevant here. The much more interesting fault lines were exposed on the fringes of the debate. The conversation began with
That's a mighty convenient approach to have. It's a mighty convenient. Sorry, go ahead.
The bulk of the conversation or the substance of it.
Like, I mean, it's wild to me how many people who want to find a way to defend Douglas Murray in this debate, which just on so many levels to me seems to be like a crazy losing game. Like, why would you want to go down with this sinking ship? But okay. But really to just brush away, forget about any of the content of the debate. That's been debated before. Well, okay, but like there's 2 wars raging on right now. Again, as I've made the point before, I often call what's going on in Gaza a war. Not really sure that's the appropriate name for it. But no, I am sorry, especially if you're going to be talking about like journalistic standards and the difference between entertainers and commentators, which again, as Konstantin admits himself, he's essentially the same thing I am. I mean, I guess he doesn't still do comedy. I still do comedy, but he's a guy talking about issues that he cares about on a podcast who is not an expert in any of these areas. But isn't it awfully convenient how there could be so much discussed and written about, like my standards or my lack of expertise or all of this, and none of them ever want to do is point to like, Dave got these 5 things wrong. Douglas Murray demonstrated his expertise in this point. It's never that. And in fact, he just openly, imagine like starting your review of a debate and then openly going, hey, I'm not so interested in the debate. Forget that part. But how about the other part? Whatever. We'll see what he's about to say here. But it is just, I don't know. I do find it incredibly revealing that anybody would be giving their take, writing their most read article on a debate and just totally take a backdoor out of the substance of any of the debate. I don't know. It's very strange. Oh man, this is my most read article I've ever written. It was about the Lakers-Knicks game last night. But forget about the game. Let's just talk about the halftime show or whatever. It's just very bizarre to me. But all right.
And do they have a specific credentialing system that they'd like to speak to for who would be qualified to be a commentator on these issues? Because I feel like if you took our track record against Rachel Maddow, we probably have a better track record of better political analysis about basically everything from the time that I've been on this podcast. So are we back to just if MSNBC platforms someone? Are they endorsing Rachel Maddow right now and saying that that's the kind of expert class that we should be listening to? Or what is there some sort of a test people are supposed to take? And what test would be better than the track record of commentary and the legacy of getting things right than you and I have? So I'm curious to know in this discussion of that we need to go back to some sort of a credentialing standard, what specifically is the standard that they're advocating for? And then give me the specific names. Who are supposed to be the voices of reason? Or where are they supposed to have come from that they now have the standard of a stamp of approval?
We can't just Rob, you can't just have podcasters talking about these things, says a podcaster. There's no problem having Dave Rubin and Bill Maher talk about them. We need experts. But like they're supposed to be experts. No. What this all is just a naked, like, I don't like that they disagree with me. I don't like the people who are critical of Israel or critical of Ukraine. I don't like them getting platformed. Essentially what's happening here, and this is just the fact, right, is that our side is winning. We're winning the battle on the podcast front. And yes, I mean, Konstantin kind of lays it out there. Yes, this became the new center of where the American political conversation is happening. And because, and in large part, it's because, well, I mean, it's a mix of things, but in large part, it has to do with the fact that the biggest podcasters happen to be really open to this anti-war point of view. You know, and they've heard people make the anti-war argument, and they're like, shit, that is really compelling. In the case of Tucker Carlson, for example, I mean, he's really like, you know, what went from being kind of like essentially a neocon and then went to Iraq. He's been there and then got turned around on it and was like, oh my God, this is a disaster, what we're doing here. But so because of that now, the gatekeepers, the new decentralized gatekeepers, aren't keeping the anti-war voices out. And so we've got a shot now to make our argument, and we're winning. And then you could see this in opinion polls. Support for the war in Ukraine has gone way down since the beginning of the war. And support for the war or Israel's assault on Gaza has gone way down, particularly with the younger generation. And so this is essentially it. It's like you're losing the argument. And so now we got to figure out, you know, how to plug up this hole. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Monetary Metals, an amazing company run by amazing people. They are revolutionizing the way you invest in gold and silver. They've been paying interest in silver and gold for over 8 years, helping you grow your wealth in real tangible assets. Finally, there's a true alternative to saving in dollars, a yield on gold and silver with Monetary Metals. Listen, I know a lot of people who listen to my show own precious metals. And if you're owning physical gold or physical silver and you're paying storage fees or whatever, however you're doing it, there's a better way, and it's Monetary Metals. Now you can make interest on your gold paid in gold, or interest on your silver paid in silver. It's revolutionary. And like I said, they're great people who run the company. So please go check them out. Monetary-metals.com. That's monetary-metals.com. All right, let's get back into the show. Anyway, let's keep playing and see.
I think we should reenact Biden's disinformation approach and make sure that internet content like this is removed from the internet, because it's too dangerous for people to hear.
The new Ministry of Truth can be Douglas Murray and Konstantin Kasin.
Or maybe the FCC should take over podcasting and also make sure that there's no curse words or sexual content of any kind. I mean, what legislative body is supposed to reside over this misinformation on the internet and make sure that it does not appear, so that Israel can continue to have public support?
Well, it's let's see if Konstantin lays it out. It's an interesting question, Rob. Yeah, let's keep playing.
Discussion of Rogan's decision to host Daryl Cooper, a man described by Tucker Carlson as America's most important popular historian. Cooper himself has the self-awareness not to own the label of historian, instead describing himself as a storyteller. His latest work is a series whose aim is to show World War II from the perspective of the Germans. To those who have studied World War II extensively, like Murray, Cooper's comments on Tucker Carlson's show and his podcast with Joe Rogan are obvious and frankly boringly familiar Nazi apologia. Far from being novel, the idea peddled by Cooper that Churchill was a warmonger who, quote, turned the invasion of Poland into a global war because, quote, he was funded by Zionist financiers, formed the core of wartime propaganda fabricated by Nazi spin doctor Joseph Goebbels. The argument that Cooper advances that
So is Douglas Murray the credentialed historian that gets to legislate what history is supposed to take place on the internet? Or is it supposed to be some sort of other administrative body that should be able to rule in Douglas's favor? Is there a court in which these opinions should be
Because if you notice, Rob, it's a very good point, because if you notice, and then, you know, he's veering into Constantine here, which is, again, it's identical to woke leftists. I don't even know. I know, you know, sometimes I'll argue that they're the woke right, but they're not. They're the left. They're just woke. I don't know. It's, oh, yes, Nazi apology. If you're not even allowed to discuss these issues, you're not allowed to look at anything from the other point of view, even when he says things that are mainstream history. Like there's the claim that Adolf Hitler was downplaying his anti-Semitism in the early 30s. There's I'm blanking on the historian's name, but he did a whole thing on this about how at the Olympics, I think it was Sagar and Jetty was just talking about this on Breaking Points, or maybe it was Ryan. One of them was talking about this. But I had read this book many years ago, but there's I think it was 1936 Olympics, the ones that are in Germany, the ones where you see Hitler tweaking out like a maniac there. They like took down a whole bunch of the anti-Jewish stuff when they were hosting the Olympics, because they kind of knew this isn't going to play that well in the rest of the world. And this is before the war. They were still kind of, you're like all nation states, they're trying to maintain good standing. But anyway, it's just, oh, you're a Nazi. You're not. This is straight from Goebbels or something. It's like, it's just so cheap and lame. But to your point, he just kind of throws in there as an assertion that to people who have really studied World War II, like Douglas Murray, like what, they never seem to have to explain, like, by what metric have you decided that Douglas Murray has studied World War II more than Darryl Cooper? Like, listen, again, there are levels to intelligence, and there are levels to knowledge. And I think that, like, this is one of the things where when I was admitting I'm not an expert, like I've had a lot of people on Twitter be like, Dave, you are an expert. You should just say you're an expert, dude, and be done with this like debate. And it's like, no, I'm not. Here's the thing. It's like, in the same way that you could, like, okay, let's imagine me and you are sitting down and let's say we're playing basketball, and there is a the number one high school player in America. Like, you're talking like Kobe Bryant when he was 17 is sitting there, and it'd be very easy for me and you to be like, that's the best basketball player in the world. Like, this is just insane. He just did a 360 dunk. This guy's lightning quick. He's 6'8". This guy's just incredible. But then, like, to someone who plays in the NBA, they'd be like, slow down. Like, there's levels to this shit. And much like as a lot of people who fight, they talk about this. It's like the better at fighting you get, the more you realize how much you suck at fighting, because but you become a purple belt, and it's like, oh my God, you could kick anybody's ass. And you're like, I roll with brown belts and black belts all day. I could not kick anybody. So anyway, I say all of that just to say this, for anybody who's consumed Darryl Cooper's work, feel however you feel about him. You could completely disagree with his politics or his conclusions or any of this. The dude is insanely well researched. Insane. Like, I mean, I genuinely think he's probably read over 100 books about Israel Palestine. Like, he's read everything, dude. Like, it's just, and so for him to just casually, and I know Darryl, and I know anybody who actually knows his work knows, like, if he's doing a World War II series, he is going to be reading everything about it. So how he just gets to claim that Douglas Murray really does his research, and he does. Do you guys ever feel the need? Like, do you ever have to show your work on these claims? How do you know that? How do you know what Douglas Murray's read versus what Darryl Cooper's read? By what metric are you making the decision that he's the one who's done his research and he isn't? I don't. And by the way, that doesn't mean who's right or wrong. These are two very different claims, right? Like there are people who are extremely well read who are wrong about everything politically, but like the way they just get to play this game and just dismiss Daryl, it's pathetic. It's like this is not, again, not an argument. None of this is an argument. This is just assertions backed by nothing.
We need censorship because too many people are listening to the other people.
Seems to be what it boils down to. But okay, I mean, they would claim they're not advocating censorship, but it's like, what exactly are you advocating then? Are you advocating Joe Rogan stop having me and Daryl Cooper on the show? Because what's really the substantive difference between that and advocating censorship?
Well, only they're credentialed people who aren't actually credentialed, such as Douglas Murray.
Right, who have lots of different opinions on lots of different subjects. We can hear from all of them. You could even be a comedian who hosts a podcast, and then you could talk about serious things. We could have a range of opinions, except for war. Except for when it comes to war, in which case we all must be lockstep on the side of these disastrous conflicts that all of you guys support that never work out. You know, it's crazy. It's whatever. Anyway, it's I'm sure. I know Douglas was saying he downplayed it. People have sent me since then, but I should have had. This is one area I fucked up on a little bit. I should have had that more in the front of my mind. But when I was like, didn't you go to Ukraine and write that article saying that Ukraine will win? And he goes, no, I didn't say that. I said it was possible Ukraine. Go read the article. The line is, Ukraine will win. Russia will lose. Okay. So sorry, guys. Yeah, you guys got it. Much like the COVID experts, you guys have been too spectacularly wrong for too long, and you're losing. You're losing the argument.
Sometimes, you know, it's an expert from the regime based on how many things they've gotten wrong. And so perhaps that's specifically why we need to listen to these people more, is because of their track record of getting things so wrong. That's how you know that they're credentialed regime experts.
It does seem to be the standard. All right, let's keep playing.
Millions of prisoners of war and civilians died on the Eastern Front because the Nazis failed to plan properly for the invasion is simply a lie. There is extensive documentary evidence which confirms that the reason millions of prisoners of war and civilians died on the Eastern Front is precisely because the Nazis succeeded in their plans. Because Murray is educated on this issue, he assumes that everyone else, including Smith, is too. Exasperated, he tries to explain that far from being revolutionary, these ideas have been pushed by discredited historians like David Irving for decades. Have you listened to his podcast, though?
Okay, can you just pause it for a second? So here's just an interesting little thing that you might notice. And again, listen, Constantine, like what you're engaged in here is propaganda. Like this is just pure bullshit. And it's not, again, it's always what it always relies on. Like if you notice with these videos, right? And this is why I say it's propaganda. You're reviewing a debate and brushing aside the debate. You're talking about expertise, but you're not pointing out anything that I got wrong. You're not, with Daryl Cooper, you're not going, okay, here, he had the Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, or he had the Anti-Humans, or he's had these big, huge series, and you're not going like, this is riddled with inaccuracies, and here are 5 of them. You're not doing that. What you're doing is taking a couple of sentences, taking them wildly out of context, misrepresenting them. What Daryl Cooper actually said, he did not make the claim that the Nazis didn't intentionally kill people in Eastern Europe. That was not his claim. What he was saying was essentially, and he said that this applies to Israel also. So what ended up, he started making this point, then Tucker kind of went on a different path, and then he never got back to like really finishing the point. But the thing he was making was actually, what he was doing was attacking neo-Nazis, actually. What he was doing was attacking the defenders of the Nazi regime. He was saying that it doesn't even matter because you're responsible either way. So in other words, his point was, Rob, I don't know if you saw him make this, but he was saying, listen, if you're Israel and you go into Gaza and then you don't have a plan for how to get innocent civilians to safety, well, that's on you. And it doesn't matter whether it was intentional or not intentional or nothing. It's your responsibility now once you commit the invasion. And so likewise, he was saying, even to because one of the things he brought up, and this is it was a letter from like one of the Nazis back to Germany who was out in Eastern Europe, and I guess it was I think it was in 1940, if I'm remembering correctly. But so he said basically they're in the middle of the war. There's a lot of devastation, and he was writing back going like, listen, like all these Jews that we got in these camps, or maybe not just the Jews, but whoever was in these concentration camps, he goes, I think a lot of them are going to starve to death, and it might be more humane to just execute them or something like that. But Daryl was saying like, look, even if that's the case, that even if you're saying like, oh, it was just like in the war, they didn't mean to do any of this or nothing. He goes, it's still a bullshit excuse because it doesn't matter. You invaded these countries, you set up these camps with no plans for how to take care of these people, and you're still responsible for it. So he wasn't making the argument that they never did this intentionally. He was saying, even if you make that argument, the argument still fails. That was the point. So again, Daryl Cooper just wrote a piece the other day. I still have not gotten a chance to read it, but Daryl Cooper just wrote a piece last week, condemning anti-Semitism. None of them will ever bring that one up. They always bring up the 3 lines that they like to take out of context. They never bring that up. But aside from that, there's, a constant in here. And this is what I mean, like when it's starting to get into propaganda, is that he sits there and he goes, actually, you know what? Bring it back a second, Natalie, because I want to make sure. Let me get this right, because I distracted myself in this rant. Just bring it back a few seconds, because I want to get the point that he was making.
Far from being revolutionary, these ideas have been pushed by discredited historians
you
like
can
David
stop it right there. Thank you. That's all I needed. So this is the other thing that's propaganda here. Okay. And you remember, I give Michael Malice a lot of credit for being the one who pointed this out to me. And then as soon as he points it out, you go, oh, that's a really, really good point. But his point was, he goes, you remember when they tried to cancel Joe Rogan last time? I'm sorry that I might have brought another one on him, but it'll fail. So it's cool. But so last time they were trying to cancel him over the COVID stuff, and you remember, do you guys remember? I'm sure, Natalie, you weren't with us on the show there, but I'm sure you remember at this point, every single person in the corporate media, all of them, all said horse dewormer. Joe Rogan is taking horse dewormer. Now, ivermectin, the drug, first of all, I think it's been prescribed 1 billion times to people. It's people have won Nobel Prizes for ivermectin and stuff. It's like, it's people medicine. Now it's also veterinary medicine, but it's given to like hundreds of different species of animals. Now, one of those things is for horse deworming. And yet they all picked that one. Like, just think about that from like a mathematical point of view. Like the odds of that are like 1 in 100 billion or something like that, that you would all pick the one thing. If there's like tens of thousands of different options, and every single person in the mainstream media happened to pick this one, why is that? Okay, because they all decided that this was the most discrediting thing to say, that this is the thing that would make him look the worst. So likewise, where'd you get David Irving from? Why are you saying, okay, now it is true that David Irving may have shared some of these views, but Pat Buchanan wrote a whole book about it. Pat Buchanan was a speechwriter for Richard Nixon. He worked in the Ronald Reagan White House, and I think he worked in one other. I believe he was in 3 White Houses. He ran for president twice. He's a New York Times bestseller. He was on TV and wrote a very successful column for like 50 years. He's a household name, more or less, in this space. Why aren't you picking him? Why are you saying this is from David Irving? You know why, Rob? Because David Irving was also a Holocaust revisionist. He also, I don't remember, I don't know enough to know exactly. They'd call him a Holocaust denier. I think his argument was that it was like a couple million people, but it wasn't 6 million people. Regardless of any of that, they could, you know what I mean? Like say, oh, he's regurgitating Pat Buchanan's thing. Why do they all pick David Irving? For the obvious guilt by association thing, to smear him as a Holocaust denier, even though he's never once done that. Like, I'm sorry, this is a woke leftist tactic. Like, I don't, and this is why it's such a losing, like all of this to me, and don't get me wrong, I'm taking on this stuff because I think it's a bad argument. I think they're wrong. And I'm actually shocked by how bad the argument is. But what the thing that's been so strange for me over the last couple weeks is that you're just like, I can't believe you guys all want to go down this path. Like, you really want to sit here and argue on behalf of the expert class and these issues have been dealt with long ago. But what does that mean? Like when someone like Konstantin will say the reason why Douglas Murray is so frustrated is because we've already batted down all these stupid ideas. But I think for a lot of us, we go, oh yeah, but that was back when the evil machine had full control of everything. Maybe we didn't really bat down these ideas. Maybe Pat Buchanan was right about all those things he was saying. I mean, I don't know. Yes, it is true to some degree that Douglas Murray's ideas won the day, and people like Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul's ideas lost the day. But what have we gotten for that? And at a certain point, if we figure out that we've been lied to about everything for the last 20 years, some people might go, well, what were they saying 30 years ago? What were they saying 40 years ago? What were they saying 60 years ago? It's a natural reaction. That doesn't mean everything they were saying is wrong, but it definitely means you can't just dismiss it away as that's already been taken care of. Sorry, we've seen how this machine works. Okay, let's keep playing.
Decades. Have you listened to his podcast, though? Rogan interjects. It turns out Murray hasn't, and this is later used as evidence against him after the episode airs. Unlike Murray, I have listened to Cooper's podcasts, including the one about the history of Palestine that people often cite in his defense. He details the persecution of Jews preceding the events he covers, and so he couldn't possibly be anti-Semitic, is their argument. From this, they conclude that he couldn't possibly be a Nazi apologist. The reason they make this logical error is that in the entertainment world, words do not have meanings, they have feelings. And thanks to the woke left's misuse of the word Nazi for the last decade, in Podcastistan, the term is not a descriptive label, but a vague, meaningless insult used to cancel people. Unlike his opponents, Murray clearly understands that the term Nazi apologist has a defined meaning. And the fact that most Nazi apologists are anti-Semitic does not mean you have to be anti-Semitic to fit the description. The Grok definition of a Nazi apologist is someone who defends, justifies, or minimizes the actions, ideology, or atrocities committed by the Nazi regime, often by excusing Nazi policies or promoting revisionist narratives that distort historical facts. Since Cooper does precisely this...
Pause it right there. No, he fucking doesn't. Even by your dumb Grok definition, Cooper does not do that. But hey, listen, this is like, again, I'm just so sick of like having the same argument over and over again. He's about to put a World War II series out. I say he's not going to minimize the Nazi atrocities at all. You clearly think he's going to. Let's see who's right. Let's see who's right when it comes out. Okay? And like, yeah, I mean, again, it's almost like we're getting into this territory. In fact, I don't know if you remember this, Rob. I believe we played it on the show. But there was this great moment that Sam Harris, my dear friend, had when he had Chelsea Handler on his show, and they were talking, I think it was about Bill Burr, but I'm not sure about that. But someone, I think Sam, I don't remember exactly how it went, but the idea of having black friends got brought up, and it was like, oh, he's not racist, he has a black wife. And she goes, oh yeah, but that's the old, I'm not racist, I have black friends. And then Sam just destroys her on it. And he goes, no, I know the left like does this thing where they just repeat that over and over again until it becomes like a trope. But like, that's actually very good evidence that you're not racist. It's excellent evidence. Now, I am not saying it is technically impossible to be married to a black woman and hate black people. I suppose you could hate your wife. You could make an exception for your wife and hate all other black, like, okay, but it is pretty damn good evidence. Like it literally is on the level of if I was like, hey, Rob, you hate eggs. And you were like, I don't hate eggs. I had scrambled eggs for breakfast. And I go, oh, that's what they all say. They all say they had scrambled eggs for breakfast. And you're like, no, that's a very good defense against saying you don't. Now, technically speaking, is it possible that you hate eggs and you just force feed yourself eggs every morning, even though they disgust you? Like, yeah, I guess technically it's possible, but it is like overwhelming evidence in the direction that you like eggs. if you eat them for breakfast. In a very similar sense, yes, it is very strong evidence that you're not a Jew hater, that you're not a Nazi apologist, if you detail in graphic, brutal detail the horrific treatment of Jewish people in Europe. Yes, those two things don't jive together. And you got to really jump through some mental hoops in order to tell yourself that no, they don't. It's pretty straightforward. All right, let's keep playing.
Several appearances on major podcasts, how his series on Palestine would change this reality is clearly as confusing to Murray, who hasn't listened to it, as it is to me, who has. Indeed, one of the main areas of misunderstanding in the discussion is the role of expertise. He doesn't claim to be an expert, is Smith's riposte to Murray's suggestion that Cooper doesn't know what he's talking about. He uses the same defense when Murray questions Smith's own willingness to opine on geopolitics. The central critique of Murray here is that he's arguing from authority, which is what the mainstream media has done for years to gaslight the public about everything from transgenderism to COVID to war. Smith and his supporters argue that the concept of expertise has been so discredited that he, and anyone else for that matter, is entitled to express any view about any issue they want. The audience, they say, can judge these views for themselves. Murray's attempt to dismiss such views on the basis that they don't align with expert opinion is seen as an ineffective argument at best and an attempt at credentialism at worst. There's a sliver of truth to this criticism. Engaging the argument someone is making directly is a much more powerful approach. But to suggest that arguments from authority are entirely invalid is silly. Almost everything you believe is based on an argument from authority. Light bulbs, for example, are a fairly unsophisticated and omnipresent part of our lives. Yet the number of people watching this video who are capable of explaining how they work without resorting to arguments from authority will be vanishingly small. I'm not just talking about the fact that most people...
This is what Konstantin starts doing this in a lot of his videos here. And it's just, it's like the last time we took it apart when he's explaining first principles and just clearly does not know what a first principle is. Like objectively, not my opinion or your opinion, just like that's not what a first principle is. He goes, my first principle is that October 7th was wrong. You're like, no. That's not how that works at all. He's just misusing terms here. An argument from authority or an appeal to authority is a logical fallacy. Okay, it's saying that because somebody's an authority figure, therefore they're correct. What he's talking about is specialization, the division of labor, and the fact that human beings have very limited knowledge. I don't need to know anything about light bulbs. That's not an argument from authority. That's just, I don't know, and other people do, and I judge it based on the fact that it seems to work. An appeal to authority would be if I were to say, none of these lights are working, none of these are turning on, and you were to say, yes, they are, because an electrician said so. You get the difference? They're just different things. One's a logical fallacy and one is not. But again, this is, as I've made the point several times now, you can pick your logical fallacy here, but Douglas Murray is clearly making one. It's either an appeal to authority or he's just straw manning. Because if you're saying that the claim here is that I don't think we need expertise, so I've never said anything that even kind of indicated that. And in fact, as I go out of my way every time I'm on Joe Rogan's podcast, I make sure to mention all of the experts who have influenced my thinking on these topics. So again, it's just a non-argument. There's nothing here. It's just not true. Yes, it is true that we rely on expertise. Nobody is arguing against expertise. What I argued against was that the expert class should be the only ones who can weigh in on these topics. Not that expertise isn't important. Again, as I've said over and over again, if this really was Douglas Murray's argument, which it was a bit more than that, but if this really was his argument, then he could have stated it in one sentence and we could have moved on. Hey, when you talk about these issues, it's really important to know what you're talking about. You agree, Dave? You agree, Joe? Yes, 100% agree. Yes, 100% agree. Let's have the debate now. That's it. Otherwise, you're just knocking down straw men. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is the Ridge Wallet. I love the Ridge Wallet. Big fan. It's the coolest, sleekest, like minimalist wallet. They've got a bunch of different designs, and they're just really cool looking. It's like a great conversation starter, and also you don't need, it's like you don't need that big old bulky wallet. I think Jerry Seinfeld and George Costanza figured this out 30 years ago. But you're throwing your spine out of alignment. You're sitting on a brick in your back pocket. All you need is the sleek little Ridge wallet. It holds your cards and your cash, everything you really need. So make sure to go grab one. They also have an AirTag attachment, so you'll always know exactly where your wallet is. You don't have to panic about losing it. Ridge isn't just about wallets. They create premium everyday carry essentials like key cases, suitcases, rings, all built with the same sleek, durable design. No matter what you pick, Ridge has free shipping, a 99-day risk-free trial, and a lifetime warranty on all of their products. So right now, Ridge is having their once-a-year anniversary sale. You can get up to 40% off at ridge.com/POTP10. That's the website. Head on over to ridge.com/POTP10 to see their biggest sale of the year. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please let them know that you heard on the Part of the Problem podcast. Ridge.com/POTP10. All right, let's get back into the show. Anything you want to add, Rob, or you want to jump back in?
Light bulbs aren't real, and the only reason why racists will marry black people is because they have white vaginas. And I'd like to be on the record with both of these factual statements.
There you go.
Happy I can
he's
add
an expert
depth to this conversation.
He's an expert, folks. All right, let's keep playing.
People couldn't explain how electricity works. I'm talking about the fact that almost everyone who can will only be able to do so by quoting the work of other people rather than experiments and research they themselves have conducted. While Rogan seems to side with Smith in this exchange, it is highly unlikely he would adopt the same approach to his own areas of expertise. When it comes to mixed martial arts, his interview guests are the best of the best. The dazzling array of UFC champions, top MMA coaches, respected trainers, and other experts does not appear to include comedian Dave Smith. There's a popular clip on the Jerry YouTube channel in which...
Pause it for a second. Wrong. I've talked MMA a bunch with Joe on the podcast. You're just factually wrong. In fact, Joe talks MMA with comics all the time. And you know what he does is like, yeah, okay, it's an area that Joe has legit expertise in. And if they get something wrong, he'll be like, nah, I think that's wrong. And if they get something right, he'll go, great point. That's exactly right. Because he takes on what you're actually saying. He doesn't just say, I'm the expert, therefore everything you say is wrong. So you're just blatantly wrong. Terrible example, and a terrible example to pick me of, because I've actually talked MMA a bunch with Joe on and off the podcast.
You want to...
Again, also, the same example Douglas Murray used. Interesting.
I'll tell you something interesting about light bulbs. I don't understand how light bulbs work, but I have electrocuted myself. And from learned experience, I could tell you if you touch the exposed light bulb, you might electrocute yourself. You know what else I can tell you from learned experience? If you consistently listen to regime experts, you're probably getting bad information. Now, I might not actually be an expert in any of the topics that the regime tries to pitch to me, but I can tell you more often than not from the 10 years of following these topics, when the regime is really selling you on something, you might want to do your own homework, because from my own experience, they seem to be lying a whole bunch. I don't need an expertise on light bulbs to tell you, hey, I touched one and I got electrocuted. Hey, you might be careful. You might want to be careful touching that thing, and don't use Christmas lights as shower lights. I can tell you that one. I'm not an electrician, but I learned my lesson on that one. I don't know. It's just, it seems like a lot of fancy talk for, hey, we need some censorship because I got a check from Israel and I got a war to sell here.
It sure does feel that way. I will say it's like, again, Bobby Kennedy made this point. Is an excellent point. But when someone said something, they hit him with this appeal to authority, and they were like, well, the experts say that vaccines don't cause whatever negative outcomes. And he said something along the lines of, he goes, listen, he was an environmental lawyer for many years. And he was like, every suit I ever brought, the prosecution called expert witnesses and the defense called expert witnesses. And every single time the experts completely disagreed, You could find experts that said, oh, there's this lake is horribly polluted. And then other experts would say, no, this is a safe level. And so this is kind of where a lot of this breaks down too, is that you go, it's always like, listen to the experts, but then it's also like, well, which experts? Which experts are you listening to? Are you arguing that there aren't experts who agree with what I was saying? Is that really the claim here? It's like, okay, no, nobody's making that claim. By the way, it's great. Like they, especially the pro-Israel, it's like, they're like, we have to defer to the experts. And you're like, okay, every single international humanitarian organization claims that there's like a goddamn catastrophe going on over here and that it's war crimes are being committed and have been for many, many decades. Like, okay, well, not them. You go like, then they appeal to international law. You go, well, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. No, that part's stupid. You know, it's like always like, okay, there's no shortage of experts who are critical of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. So again, can we just have the actual debate? Can you make a real point? Seems like you can't. All right, let's keep playing.
Smith breaks down why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. I was unable to find one of him breaking down Brazilian jiu-jitsu moves, despite Smith possessing a similar level of expertise on both subjects. Smith and Rogan are irked when Murray expresses his befuddlement that Smith has become a prominent voice.
Let's just pause it right there. Okay, you're right. It didn't get clipped up. I mean, I have talked about jiu-jitsu on Rogan's podcast before. And like, I don't know, but just the point just fails because like I have talked to, I guess he's right. That clip, they put out that clip and it went super viral. You notice again, what Konstantin's not doing is pointing out what I got wrong in the clip. He's not saying like, oh, he said this and he got it wrong. But I want you to genuinely ask yourself this, everybody who's listening, because this is like a very basic honesty test here. And Konstantin, to you too, because I'm sure you'll watch this. How the fuck do you know what level of expertise I have about Brazilian jiu-jitsu compared to the cause of the Ukraine war? Like, by what are you claiming to judge that? I have the same, you're just putting me at 0 at both? Like, me and Konstantin debated Ukraine, and like the general consensus was that I smoked him in the debate. So like, what expertise does he think he has that I don't have? But why would you, how would you possibly know? How many books have I read about the lead up to the war in Ukraine? How do you know? You have no fucking idea. You're just pretending. You're lying. You're making this up. It's just, and it's ridiculous. I mean, like I would never, I don't know. I just would never do this. Like I would never engage in this tactic. I mean, it's possible that after smoking someone in a debate, if it was like, okay, the one thing I could think of was when I debated Austin Peterson on Israel. And it was coming off, he debated Clint Russell and then he debated me, and they both went terribly bad for him. And at one point, I remember, I mean, he got so much wrong, just didn't know it. At one point, Clint mentioned the Nakba, and he goes, the Nakba, I haven't heard of that. I think you're referring to the Balfour Declaration. And Clint was like, no, the Balfour Declaration was in 1917. We're talking about 1948 right now. And like, okay, so after that debate, and then after my debate, I did conclude, I don't think this guy's ever read anything about this topic. But it was like 4 reasons, it was like, I think you don't know what you're talking about. 4 reasons. These guys seem to never feel the need to give any of the reasons. Just asserted. Douglas Murray knows. Darryl Cooper doesn't. Dave Smith doesn't. Like, okay. Care to elaborate? All right, let's keep playing.
About Israel and Palestine without ever having visited the Middle East. The shock at the idea that someone ought to see things with their own eyes before commenting on them is palpable. Indeed, in the aftermath of the debate, Smith promoted a popular video in which Murray's statements to this effect are contrasted with his previous ridicule of the concept of lived experience. This is very low-quality thinking. If you do not see things with your own eyes, your opinions are by definition not your own. They are an agglomeration of opinions and facts you have gathered from other sources whose veracity you cannot properly evaluate. That doesn't necessarily make them wrong. Indeed, most of our opinions about...
This is an absurd claim. Like, just totally ridiculous. Your opinions aren't your own unless you've been to the place. Like, I mean, I do not understand how he wrote that down, sent it out, then read the words in front of a camera and didn't think to himself, oh, wait, what am I saying exactly here? Your opinions aren't your own if you got them from somebody else or if you haven't gone to the place before. Like, that just makes absolutely no sense. So you're saying let's just say you attend a debate between two experts. Now, the whole purpose of a debate, right, is to persuade the audience. You hear the arguments this guy makes, you hear the arguments this guy makes, you go, I think that guy made superior arguments. Oh, and he had no answer for that. And that was a really good point. I think this guy's right on that issue. That's not my opinion now because somebody else informed my opinion. By the way, the logical conclusion of this, you understand, is that none of us have any opinions about anything. Because even going to a place, you're still being influenced by the people. Like, it's not as if, obviously, again, if Douglas isn't knocking down a straw man, obviously you can gain insight by traveling to a place. You could learn things that you didn't know before. But to pretend like by putting your feet on the soil, you magically now take in all of the information and everybody's experience and see it from everyone else's perspective is fucking ludicrous. And the idea that like that's the only true opinion is if you go somewhere, anyway, it makes absolutely no sense. No, you can gain, in fact, you can gain a lot more insight by reading experts than you can just by going on a trip. I mean, like, look, let's say, Rob, me and you went, what was it, 2 years ago now, we went on a European tour. We went to Ireland and Scotland and Amsterdam and London. I don't know too much about those countries' history. Like, I know a little bit here and there. I know mostly what kind of involves America. You know what I mean? Like, are the areas I know most about. But like, okay, let's say we go to Ireland, right? If I were to do a deep dive on Ireland or the Irish history, the way I have on Israel, Palestine, or Ukraine, or any of the topics that I talk a lot about, like, let's just say if I were to read 15 books about the history of Ireland, okay, which I'm not going to do, but like I could do it if I had to. So let's just say I read 15 books. Are you honestly telling me that you think I would get more insight from our trip there than from reading 15 books about it? Like, that's just not clear at all. But anyway, the idea that we don't have opinions unless we've been to the place and seen it with our own eyes, this makes no sense. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Guys, if you are considering starting therapy, maybe you're on the fence about it, let me just say that I highly recommend therapy. It's something I've benefited from in the past. I know many others who have benefited from it too. And if you are one of those people who's on the fence, check out BetterHelp, because this is the best way to do it. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire. They match you with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Check them out at betterhelp.com/problem today, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/problem for 10% off your first month. All right, let's get back into the show.
So conceptually, if I were to see a picture of the pyramids, I can't have an opinion that they're impressive because I haven't actually been there. And inversely, if I read or see footage of the Holocaust in Auschwitz, I can't have the opinion that it's terrible because I wasn't there. And the only way that you could form an opinion is by actually being somewhere. So I guess the entire field of history, by the way, that doesn't exist. I guess all of physics, I mean, I don't know. How many people are in a lab observing the laws of physics? I guess maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example. But there's entire fields of study that are conceptual. So
absolutely. Or the idea that like an astrophysicist can't have a real opinion, only an astronaut can, right? Like, you haven't been there. So it's just, I mean, literally, I'm
Right, I can't do the
shocked.
analytics about the being on Mars to try and plan for how someone could survive on Mars. I'd have to actually go to Mars.
Yeah, it's
and
not
that
your
would be
opinion.
the only way that I
yeah.
could decipher the information about how we might survive on Mars.
I am, and I mean this, I'm shocked.
There's never been a guy who's, before he went to a factory, was pulled in for a consulting job and then looked at the spreadsheets and the books to figure out what might actually help the company be more profitable. Never happened.
Yeah. Well, it's again, like I said, I'm shocked, and not like Douglas Murray was like being performative that he was shocked I haven't been there. I'm genuinely shocked that Konstantin would go down with this. It might be the worst argument I've ever heard. Anyone like you don't have opinions unless you've been to the place. It's wild. All right, let's keep playing.
They are an agglomeration of opinions and facts you have gathered from other sources whose veracity you cannot properly evaluate. That doesn't necessarily make them wrong. Indeed,
but
most
what is this
of our
also,
opinions
pause it
about
for a second. Why can't you evaluate other people's opinions? You can't have an opinion. Like, why can't you evaluate somebody else's expertise? If that's the case, true, then shouldn't nobody be allowed to side with Douglas Murray in the debate? After all, they're just listening to another expert who's been there, right? Expert. Anyway, let's keep playing.
most things are not our own. You know why? Because we get them from people we consider to be authorities on the subject in question. You might call them experts. The great trick being deployed here is to allege that experts can't be trusted while relying on a different set of experts. On Ukraine, the non-expert Smith is using the ideas of people he considers experts like John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs. On World War II, the non-expert Cooper deploys the arguments of people he considers experts like David Irving, and so on and so forth. All opinions are valid and should be given a hearing, scream the people whose entire media diet is made up of people who only push the narrative they prefer. This is where Smith...
Who said that? Who said that? Again, just blatant straw man. Yes, again, none of us were ever, not me or Joe, we're not arguing against expertise. And we were not saying, I certainly have never said, I'm not informed by experts. Yes, I've read the experts that back up your side. I've read the experts that back up the other side. I think the ones on your side are full of shit, and the other ones make much better arguments. That's my opinion on this. The point is that I still get to talk about this, and I still get to have an opinion, just like fucking you do, Konstantin. This is just too nutty, dude. You're in the process. I mean, how is this not a performative contradiction of some sense, Rob? He's explaining all of this, right? On a podcast. Like, what are we talking about here? This is too crazy. All right, I'll play a couple more minutes and then I think we're just going to call it an episode because this is just too nutty.
Really turning into Spaceballs here.
It's the arguments he makes about countries he's never visited from other people. And the arguments are then judged not on whether they're true, something Smith does not have the ability to assess, but on whether they sound true.
This is
right why he routinely...
I don't have the ability to assess the truth. So then listen.
But he does.
Then neither do you, motherfucker. So you can't make that claim. You're contradicting yourself. It's like saying the truth doesn't exist. What's the problem with that sentence, Rob? You're making a truth claim, right? If you're saying the truth doesn't exist, you're saying that's the truth. Well, then the truth would have to exist. It's a self-contradicting statement. If you're saying I can't assess the truth, then neither can you, dude. By the way, you've also never been to Israel or Gaza.
He hasn't?
So you can't have a comment on this either. Or it just sounds true, right? No, this is wokeism. This is postmodernism. There's no truth. There's no way of knowing what truth is. Yes, there are things called facts and logic, and regular people can actually use these things. All right, let's keep playing a little bit more, and then we're going to wrap up.
Makes basic cognitive errors of the kind I described the last time he and I sparred over my viral Israel video. As for experience, the woke concept of lived experience was not ridiculed because experience doesn't matter. You would have to be deeply dishonest to deny that experiences are informative. If Michael Jordan claimed that there's a correct way to dunk a basketball based on his experience and his conversations with Kobe Bryant, do you imagine that Smith and his defenders would screech about MJ just using arguments from authority and lived experience? The reason many of us pushed back against the concept of lived experience, other than the great tautology.
Well, like, yeah, we would if he was lying to us. You know? Like, if he told you the best way to dunk a basketball is with your feet, I'd be like, well, first off, that's illegal in basketball, and that'll be a turnover. And also, I've watched you dunk with your hands many, many times. Again, you could see, right? Everyone could see this here. It's just like a blatant straw man. No one's arguing against expertise, and nobody's saying that your experience doesn't matter. The point is that to say something like your opinion's not valid because you've never been there isn't actually taking on someone's argument. And that is identical to the lived experience argument. To just say that, like literally the argument would go something like that. This is how the lived experience argument would go. Would be something like, you'd be like, well, I'm looking at this data here, and I can see the number of police shootings last year, and I can see the number of unjustified police shootings here, and it's actually very few amount of unarmed black people were killed by cops, and it doesn't seem to be at a much higher rate than other races. And they'd go, you've never been a black person, so you don't know what it's like. You don't have the lived experience. That is identical to the argument Douglas Murray was making. It's not saying that, like, yeah, look, here's the thing, is that if I got into a debate with Michael Jordan about how to play basketball, he should just fucking school me at the debate. He shouldn't have to sit there and just tell me he's an expert the whole time. And if he was just telling me, then that's a non-argument.
And
period.
The thing about Michael Jordan is that he won a lot of championships, as did Kobe Bryant. And so if they decided to talk about that topic, I go, wow, these are the experts. But when the expert class decides to tell me something and they've gotten it all wrong repeatedly, I go, it's like if Michael Jordan broke his legs before he got to the NBA and never played basketball other than at the high school level. And
it's a good point. It's a good point. We judge him. Yeah, it's because he won a lot. That's why you're even bringing up his name. It's because he was right in the sense in your analogy, right? So, like, yes, I suppose that if Douglas Murray, if the war in Iraq was a smashing success, and then the war in Afghanistan was a smashing success, and then the war in Libya was a smashing success, and then the war in Ukraine was a smashing success, then yeah, maybe he'd get a little bit more of that respect. But the thing is, he supported all of them, and they were all unmitigated disasters, while I was good on them. So yeah, forgive me if I don't just take him at his word, and I'm going to insist that him or you, Konstantin, have to make a fucking argument, which none of this is. All right, we're going to wrap up on that, and I promise we will move on to other topics. But, you know, they keep handing me free content, and let's get real. It's fun. It's fun. People like it. And there's always these episodes where people go like, oh, I don't even like these episodes. And you're like, well, they do really good numbers. So I think you do. All right, guys, we do got to wrap on that. Thank you very much for listening. Catch you next time. Peace.